Yeah, so I'm Florence Chen, President of AIA Hong Kong. Thank you for coming tonight, joining our events called East Meets East, William Lim Contemporary Asia, Asian Design. Well, I think a lot of us here from the audience, you all went through some forms of design training. And I think it is fair to say that a lot of the time, the mainstream design trainings coming from the perspective from a Western world. Like myself, who was trained at, my undergraduate was in Hong Kong. But even when I was studying in Hong Kong, my architectural history started with Greek architecture or Roman architecture, all the way to Renaissance, neoclassicism, and the last decade, the last century, which is about the modern architecture. So it's all coming from like a Europe or American point of views. While sometimes you get an electives and then you can study Southeast Asian architecture or Chinese architecture, but it's never considered as like a mainstream, but it's more like an electives that you will take or is optional, right? So when I first heard about Williams, like having this book on East Meets East, I was quite intrigued by the topic because it's not East meets West or West meets East, but it is about like East meeting East. In a way, I think it was a very powerful statement because it is a title that is not just a self-reflection, I believe, but it's also an assurance of our Asian identity, and also a question or a challenge to the status quo about how we see history and design in general. So today we are very happy to have William Lim, Dr. William Lim, which is our past president, and also founder and managing director of CL3 to be with us. Like Dr. Lim, I think most of you here knows about like Dr. Lim is not just an architect by training, but he is also actively involved in art and also in culture precinct. So we are very happy today that he's going to share with us some of his thoughts behind this book and also like his visions for his work. And also online here today, we have Lyndon Neri, who is a co-founder of a very successful practice, Neri and Hu Design based in Shanghai. Neri is also the founder of the Design Republic in Shanghai, which is a design platform incorporating retail design and cultural exhibition and educations. And in addition to the two operations that he's having, he is also like actively teaching in various institutes, including Harvard Graduate School of Design, as well as the Yale School of Architecture. And then right next to William is Stanley Wong. I believe that a lot of you have also like heard about Stanley through his various involvement in art and design. He is and also the founder of 84,000 communications which is also very successful company. Mr. Wong is also like very passionate about photography as well as creative medium with a strong focus on social issues. So we are very happy to have Stanley with us today, also to share his views about the story behind the books. And last but not least, I'm also going to have Christine Bruckner, who is a long time and a very dedicated institute leaders of our AIA, not just the Hong Kong chapter, but also the international chapters. I think one of the major reasons why we are having Christine here is also trying to give a spin on how, from an American point of view, seeing this topic of East meets East, as well as also from a women's point of view as well. So without further ado, I'm going to invite William to the stage and to say a few words for us.
Hi, thanks everyone for coming. It's great to see everyone here. So actually, I think I'll just sit down. So actually, this book took about 2 years since the beginning of thinking about it to now. And thankfully, Stanley helped a lot in the design of this book. So the actually reason why this book came about was it also marked 30 years of my practice in CL3 and probably over 40 some years since I was in the industry and started learning about architecture. So the book actually went back to to my school projects at Cornell. And I think at the time I did both my undergraduate and graduate thesis on Chinese architecture. So for me, there's always been a topic that has been very much attached to me. And also because that when I was studying, some of the architects that I was, really admiring, like Frank Lloyd Wright or Mies van der Rohe, I did find out that their work has actually a lot of influence from Asian aesthetic and Asian architecture. And then as I dig deeper into my career and I started looking at all the things that has influenced my thinking, a lot of them are based in Asia. And I think a lot of it is also influenced by the clients I have, the users of my projects. They are all like Asian based. And also I try to push sustainability with a lot of my design. And a lot of them actually now one of the fundamental point of sustainability is to source locally, to reduce carbon footprint, to use local kind of craftsmanship, and also maybe to really design according to the climatic means of a place. So I think I learned that when I was at school. We learn about vernacular architecture. We learn about how to control, do passive design with energy and all that. So you design to the climatic condition of where the project is. But then I think for the last 40 years or so, the world becoming more globalized, and as a result, everything starts to be monotonized, almost to the point that you would do the same curtain wall building in Alaska as you would in Miami. You just change maybe the thickness of the glass or the reflectivity, but you're pretty much putting the same building everywhere with just kind of a little variation. But I think for post-COVID world, I think people will then also start to give more importance to where the project is based and how do we make the best use of the existing condition, the environment, the vernacular to build better buildings. And this is really what I started to think the topic of East meets East. And it doesn't mean that it has to be done by Asian in Asia, but I think if you're doing projects in Asia, you should think of it more as in terms of an Asian context. Similarly, if you're doing a project in Africa, you should think of it in the African context. And this is really the essence of the book. So from that point, I started to do more thinking and research. And also, I started to also realize a lot of the conditions that we're designing in Asian cities is very different from anywhere else in the world. Like we have the density that we're dealing with. We have the terrain, like Hong Kong, we're dealing with these slopes. So in Japan, Korea, also we're dealing with these hilly conditions. So some cities, some buildings, you actually end up having multiple entrances. Like in Hong Kong, definitely it's very common to have multiple entrances to a building on different levels, or even because of our transit system, a lot of cities have actually a raised transit system, which is very common in Asia. Like we're doing a project in Bangkok, where we have a street entrance and then we have another entrance on the second level, because this is where the mass transit system connect into the building. So I think these kind of conditions are very specific to Asia. So in terms of the thinking, it's not just about kind of using these very kind of iconic element to define East, but I think in terms of the way we live, the way our cities are, the way our urbanism develop, it all kind of face a very Eastern approach. And I think our solution needs to be from a very Eastern point of view. And this is really how this book starts, and maybe we can get more into it later on. And I'm actually very fortunate that Lyndon has become part of this book. So he has written an article in the book, and we would actually, I would like more to listen from Lyndon, because we don't really get to see him or listen to him that often now, that because of the COVID situation. So I would like to turn the mic over to Lyndon and let him give us his interpretation of this topic. Lyndon, is he here? Are you here?
Can you see me? William, can you see me?
We can hear you.
Oh, you can't see me. It's okay. My voice is better than my looks.
Oh, you're there. You need to be in the big screen. Okay.
No, that's
all
all
right.
That's
Why don't
right.
Oh, but you're seeing us here.
Yes, I'm seeing you.
So I'll just sit here.
You can sit down. And I believe we're going to share some. Serene from my office is going to share a screen. And I'm just going to share briefly. William, thank you very much. It's truly an honor to be able to be part of this book. When William approached me, it was an honor. I struggled with it. It's an issue that I have been dealing with as a practice, as an individual, as a Huaqiao myself. I resonated well with a lot of what William's talking about. I start with this slide by Liang Shicheng's quote: "The arrogance or shame of a people originates from ignorance of their history. Only by understanding the past can one objectively generate a deep sense of pride in your place." Oftentimes we either frivolously are arrogant over some of the position we have, be it East or West, or very shameful of a past, both East and West. But it is only through this understanding, deeply understanding of where we are and the things we are, what we stand for, the ethos that we stand for, can we objectively generate a deep sense of pride, be it within our own selves or respecting other people's. So it has been estimated that around 50 million Chinese are living overseas. They are called Huaqiao, a term referring to people of Chinese birth or ancestry residing outside of China. At the end of the 19th century, the Qing dynasty government of China realized that the overseas Chinese could be an asset. And this was written in my foreword for this book. I just thought I wrote this again in a bridge of knowledge from the outside of China. So it does began to recognize the use of the term Huaqiao. Next. So if you look at this next image, these are two of the pioneers, Chinese architect, Liang Shicheng and Lin Huiying. So specifically in the field of architecture, this couple, a pair of architects, also architectural historians, they went to University of Pennsylvania. This was before Louis Kahn's period, and Paul Kray at that time became quite significant. The Beaux-Arts way of doing architecture in the 1930s, he was so prominent. In fact, when I was working in the US for Detroit Institute of the Arts, when I was working for Michael Graves, I actually came across Paul Kray. And it was interesting because in that education, Liang and Ling were immediately made aware of the lack of in-depth scholarship on China's rich architectural tradition. So when they returned to Beijing, both Liang and Ling not only championed this discipline, they realized that in order for them to understand the concept, they tried this notion of the Western idea of mimicking how historic structure are best studied. And it is best studied by firsthand field observation, meaning you can't take pictures, you can't base it on just narrative, but actually you have to be on site. This was a radical idea in China, where scholars at that time had always researched the past through manuscript, in writing in the safety of their libraries, where architecture was not traditionally considered one of the high arts, to which the literati devoted studies such as calligraphy, painting, and porcelain. Architecture was never really considered as high art, but it was ranked as craft. So Ling and Liang came and said, look, we need to have this field observation. And so what they did was, you look in the next image, it was quite interesting. If you look at the next image, Serene, next. Okay, the next image is interesting because you can see the Rodin Museum, which is still standing today in Philadelphia. That's designed by Paul Kray, and the design of this Beaux-Arts rendering, not that, go back to the drawing, Serene, sorry. So the Rodin Museum, sorry, the image is wrong, Serene, go back to the drawing. No, you're moving forward, backward. So in this particular image, what Liang was trying to do was, his personal mission was for China to be able to modernize without losing old China. And so, what's going on? Sorry guys, something is wrong with this screen. Go back to the drawing of the Beaux-Arts drawings. Page 3. Sorry, guys, something was wrong. Anyways, the drawing, as you can see, the comparison on page 3, which is here, what he was trying to do was using the same technique to identify a particular attitude in architecture. So this was a Beaux-Arts way of drawing, but clearly very Chinese in its articulation. So this was, if you know it, it's Foguang Temple. So the next image I want to show you is this particular amazing, which I managed to see for the first time in Shanxi. Back to the drawing. Don't jump to page 5. Page 4, please. So in June 1937, I want to show the drawing, page 4. Among numerous discoveries, Liang and Ling's greatest triumph was the identification of the Foguang Temple, a timber structure dating back to 857 AD, the third oldest building. This was the first time in Wutaisan, Shanxi province, that this breakthrough happened. And when it happened, it realized that there were previously such tank structures that only could be found. The Japanese used to say that wood structure started in Japan. This is the first time that we realize that the Tang Dynasty actually had some of these amazing structure. What's even more interesting is the sectional quality of this. So if you look at the floor plan, oftentimes you just see the structure above this mound, above this structure, when in fact there is a section cut that leads you to this. When I went there, I was shocked because all I saw was picture of kind of this ornate building on top. But what I realized is that history is quite rich, and there's a context in which that when you say Chinese architecture doesn't have that sectional quality, they were dead wrong. Next. So the next image you will see in here is my photograph. I actually took my kids there, page 5. And in this particular image, you can kind of see that sectional quality, which is amazing. You have this stairway that leads you up to this platform. Oftentimes when you look at Foguang Temple, oftentimes you just see that building. But when in fact, what was so radical about this is underneath that plinth, there's this stairway that leads you up, and it's extremely steep and extremely sectional. And I find this quite interesting. So I go back to this next cover by Domus. On the cover of the last issue of Domus, guest editor Jean Nouvel selected an image of our recently completed Fuzhou tea house project and posed the question, are we entitled to modify the past? This is our project that we recently complete. It's another way to ask, how do architects today engage our present design and construction with the remnants from the past? Which is exactly what William is talking about, the context in which you practice in. And how do we create a hopeful future to build upon that past? It could be shameful, it could be prideful, but certainly that past is important to be recognized and be remembered. So the next image shows us this increasingly urgent issue in China and Asia to a certain extent. The world is related to a broader subject of sustainability, as William talked about, and restoration, as related to urban reuse or adaptive reuse. Since 1990, 1 out of 6 families in China have been evicted and relocated. And I know a number of parts of Southeast Asia, they're just not documented, but this happened. So you also see that next image is that intense development over the last 20 years has forced a city like Shanghai, where we practice, where we live, as well as practice, to confront with the aftermath of demolition, the erasure of traditional urban fabric, which we have to absolutely be careful of. Which brings us to the next image. Here we enter into a related but ever more complex issue of architecture as a production of cultural meaning and identity. That left image is Michael Wolff's photography. Many of you know this because Michael Wolff, German photographer, became famous, photographing a lot of Hong Kong skyline that captured this alarming trend of urbanization. If I don't tell you it's Hong Kong, some would argue it could be Bangkok, it could be other parts of it, could be the Philippines, it could be Indonesia. So it produces anonymous cities that everywhere and nowhere at the same time, which William talked about today. On the right is a typical Shanghai alleyway, always full of personality, tradition, and life. Very different from Hong Kong, different from Bangkok, different from Tokyo. The contrast between modernity and tradition seems to be at the opposite extreme in this particular spectrum. Next. But maybe I would argue that there's a coexisting balance we can find between the two extremes. Next image. Like this bronze lion from Jia Zhangke's film in 2010 entitled I Wish I Knew. Many of you know Jia Zhangke's film. Some of you are very familiar with it. Very powerful story on the urban renewal context that we are dealing with. We often look at this condition and wish we knew. But like the film's magnificent scenery, when faced with loss and destruction, we often retreat back to a sense of nostalgia and desolation. Then I go back. This is my last few image. I bring it back to William's image projects, which I find very fascinating. Next image, Serene. We can see in this the temporary bamboo theater, the West Kowloon Bamboo Theater, which is in that book, where William brings back a disappearing internal heritage in Hong Kong that we commonly seen in the 50s. Although large in size and scale compared to a structure seen in the past, William managed to bring out the historical essence by expressing the technique and craft of a bamboo structure. If you were to contrast it to the right, it seems I'm showing the dichotomy of two very different projects, and yet the spirit actually is very similar. Because even in his most modern and urban structure to date, which is manifested in his 24-story purpose-built vertical gallery building called H. Queen's Building, William has managed to showcase a communal typology commonly seen in Hong Kong buildings, with its clear reading of horizontal bars and signage that differentiate tenants on each floor. The layers expressed in this simple curtain wall-like structure clearly separates itself from the rest of the surrounding buildings in the central business district in Hong Kong. One deals with typology, the other deals with materiality, both contextual, both understanding the need of the city that he is practicing in, both needing to express the notion that ease can be quite diverse and yet can express a certain identity. Last but not the least, I want to close this talk with a quote by Homi Bhabha. He said, "It is the in-between space that carries the burden of the meaning of culture. And by exploring the third space, we may elude the politics of polarity and emerge as the others of ourselves." As Hua Qiao, we are often perceived as outsiders. When we are in the US, as Florence has talked about, or if we are in Europe, we are seen as the other. Even in China, the mainland, oftentimes we are Chinese from the outside. And we tend to balk at the idea of taking a critical position on loaded topics like identity, history, or culture. But having been transplanted back, even though my grandparents are from Xiamen, Rosanna's family is from Shanghai, I have decided and realized that perhaps coming from a third space, coming from this interstitial space, perhaps it is not so bad. For decades now, it is home for both of us, physically and spiritually. Perhaps it is this outcast status that my friend William Lim's find his greatest asset. And for all of us, Hua Qiao, unburdened by bureaucracy or heavy politics, because we are constantly in that third space, like Homi Bhabha, full of innocence, naivete, and eagerness, I believe this is where William starts opening himself up to uncover the vast knowledge of his ancestry, understanding the only way forward is to look back at a past that is so powerful, to look at the past to be able to draw a clear lineage from past to present, a present that is waiting for all of us that is practicing in the East to give back to the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lyndon. That was very inspirational. And now I invite Stanley Wong to join the stage to share with us his thoughts.
Good evening. How should I start? Actually, I'm not architect, and also I did some interior design. Let us go back to the one meeting that I was in William's office one day. Suppose the meeting's about he start to put together the Empress Lounge, that he needs some furniture, that Stanley, I want an armchair from you. So our meeting just went 10 minutes, done. So we just casually have a coffee, just update each other because it's COVID, we haven't seen each other very often. Then he said, Stanley, by the way, besides the Empress Lounge, that I'm now put together my book to conclude my 30 years career. Then I said, oh, congratulations, that's good. And then what's the book about then? It's about your career, portfolio, whatever. Then he said, no, it's a film called East Miss East. So I stopped for 2 seconds. Then I immediately followed. William, can I be part of the book? Actually, William found a little bit odd. So this guy is so passionate and immediately coming to this initiative. Honest, that's not me. I'm very calm and shy person. I never push on business, whatever a project to involve. Never, really never. But this is the first time. So William said, well, if you like it, then be my team then. Then I got to a little bit go back to why I'm so eager, immediately want to be part of this project. So let me spend 5 minutes to explain a little bit on the way or creative direction that I encounter. I've been in the industry for 40 years, exactly 40 years. So honest, I'm a graphic designer, I'm advertising, both are from the West, right? So when I start 1980, so basically most of the graphic designer and advertising creative just follow the West. Okay, you can see my poster for Wong Kar-wai. Okay, this is kind of very Western kind of languages, no doubt. That's it. That's my past. So then in one stage, then I start to realize that someone's West visual language or aesthetic culture, whatever. How about ourselves then? Then I start to, because I'm working for MTR. MTR is very, very, everyone's Hong Kong Chinese, mainly is the passengers. I should go back to see our local things. So when that time, then I can start to do a lot of advertising with very local Hong Kong things for friends of for environmental friendly, for those Western, those doesn't know what this means. It's an obituary in Chinese obituary about the world is dying. You can see how I do the MTR poster with Chinese typography, day-to-day kind of things, red lines, because MTR doesn't need to stop for red lines. We use funeral papers to identify this kind of conference for a design heaven and hell. One time I did for a Parasite art auction to selling art with the supermarket bag as a posters. Those are very, very local things I try to attempt. Of course, that my Red Rifle thing is very, very Hong Kong day-to-day things. So that's the 90s. Then up to 20 years later, when I was 40 years old, then I start to do works for mainland China market for a very cultural clothing brand called Exception, and also a book retail store called Fong So. Then I start to being Chinese, because like Lyndon just presentation, the humanity, culture, history, all those things I should be focused. Okay, so you can see some of the, okay, for example, start to do environmental friendly things. One time, this is my interior design I did for a shop for Exception in Beijing. We recall all the reused objects, environmental friendly stuff to put together as a retail space. Sometimes more Chinese philosophical messages like 活在當下, live now, as a that year, about the past, about the future. Also, Lyndon also mentioned about how we see the past, how we see the future. Working with the literature from Taiwan, you can see this also Chinese aesthetic. Then last 10 years, then I start to realize the world is changing, being globalized because of the internet, because all this familiarity, differences between us becoming less and less. Then suddenly in our graphic field, there's a few person. I want to show you the face of this person. On your left is this guy called Kenya Hara. He's the Muji brand creative director, very famous graphic designer and brand consultant. On the right-hand side, that guy from Korea, Aung San Suu, famous graphic masters and also educator. Few of us, when we're talking about things, we all come to a word Asian for the last 10 years. Our perspective, not only you are from Japan, I'm from Korea, then then because when we put Asian as the map, as a parameter, definitely we have a lot of possibility and to become even further and further. So we, few of us very, very eager to how to push Asian as a topic. Then finally, 2019, this is the first chapter that we put together, starts for the graphic designer. We haven't started to pull more architect or other discipline of designer together. That year, that starting in Seoul, 100 of us, some are students, some are designers from Asia, that we really start to look into this topic. So too bad the COVID stopped the conference further on. I think we would definitely will carry on rotating different cities to have annually come together, see how much we can share, how much we can inspire each other, and go the Asian topic further and further. And I think I should, that's when now you can see my 40 years kind of a mindset and the path. And then that's why when William said this is a topic, then definitely I want to be involved. Of course, that everyone here may be enjoying William's project, like the Empress Lounge, like his hotel in Tai Kuching, like the HQ, the gallery building, and also I also see his exhibition, of course, and also coincidentally, I checked in his hotel in Tokyo quite a few times. So I sort of know William quite a lot, I would say. But having said that, when I started this book, a lot of things I didn't know, then I enjoyed it very much for the last 2 years. So I think maybe we should now talk a little bit more all together for the book contents. Thank you.
Yes, may I invite William and also Christine onto the stage to have a discussion?
Well, hello, everybody. It is lovely to be here with you. Thank you, all three of you, for sharing your insights and giving us a few thoughts about third space. I am coming with alternative perspectives to share as a woman, as an American, but I have lived here in this third space for 25 years. And actually, if you look at I relate to you, Florence, because when I was in my undergraduate architectural degree, I also was interested that everything was starting from Egypt all the way through to the Greek and to Renaissance. And I found a course called Asian Design. And I was so excited. I brought everybody to it. Even my husband, who's here today, he came to that class with me. My best friends came to that class. I was like, there's so much more that we need to understand. And it's so fun and it's so beautiful. And at the end of that, I ended up applying and spending 6 years going back and forth to Japan, doing multiple degrees, back and forth to multiple places in the US and Japan, and just learning so many elements about Eastern and Asian design, which had a lot of meaning. And so I'm so thrilled to see you focusing on East meets East, as there are a lot of elements in there. I'm sure the audience has many questions, but I'd like to ask a few first and get us going. I appreciate that you started with sustainability and just really talking about that from where everything begins and how important it is to be local and to think about the materials that we come from. But I also, in space. But one of the things that I loved that I read through your book had to do with understanding that good architecture has the design with good chi, understanding the energy, and that the energy of these spaces, as you really understood it, when you bring in a new building, you're giving a neighborhood an opportunity to become even more vibrant and to, really create itself with more energy. So I just wonder if you could talk to that, because that's just a very positive and exciting methodology.
Yeah, I actually, it's been part of my practice and my thinking in the last 30, 40 years. So a lot of what my thinking is based on, it's actually this idea of yin and yang, that there is always a thesis to an antithesis, and coincidentally, I learned from Matthias Angers in my graduate school, and that was his thesis, is that there is always these opposite things going on, which incidentally, he's German, but I think the philosophy is very Asian and very Chinese in a way. And I actually use that to solve a lot of my design problems. I always think that when you start to complement the yin and the yang, then it kind of, things would fall into place, and you can actually solve your design concept. And in a way, I then start to realize, in a way, when you think about doing a project in an urban situation or in any situation with a site, automatically you have that yin and yang thing going on. You have the construction, and then you have the earth, which I think, again, it goes back to kind of very historic Chinese architecture, that a lot of the architecture is quite horizontal, and it's really dealing with the man-made and the earth itself, and how do you impact each other. And of course, you might think that you're just propping a building somewhere, but in a way it is not alone by itself. It starts to relate to the environment. It starts to make connection to everything. And I think, this is really how we should look at architecture, and how it relates to the environment, to the site, and how does it affect people using it. So a lot of these opposite things start to have tension against each other, and I think that tension is really make design work, and I think that is really what create a real sense of place, when you kind of play that properly.
Fantastic. Yeah, the duality, but also the idea that every space, wherever you place the building, there's a lot of research to do and understand it and be conscious of the environment.
And actually, I also work with many important people who is very superstitious. So actually, I work with their feng shui master, and I actually learned from that too. And eventually, I think it really boils down to feng shui. It's about psychology, and about how you actually make people feel comfortable in a place where you would sit when you receive guests, so that you are in the powerful position, and you put your guest in a weaker spot so you can negotiate well. This is all part of what I learned when I do projects for these people. And I think in a way it kind of start to make sense, and it really start to make me realize that there is a science in terms of how I can apply these feng shui notion to my projects too.
I think that's fascinating. I also studied feng shui, and I remember looking back and thinking a lot of the fundamentals were the same as what we learned in just excellent architecture of site location. Where do you put your back? Where's the sun? How's the wind move? How does the water move? How do you welcome people? These fundamental ideas about architecture. It's really great. So as we think about location and maybe take that in to another level, I see some of the ideas about Chinese landscape architectural design that come through. The idea of borrowed scenery, the ideas of, what you see directly and what you discover. Do you use some of those in your design, and how would you describe that in the essence of Asian design discussion?
Yeah, I think definitely I use that all the time in terms of I think it's, of course, when you have a lot of space to deal with, you don't think that you would need to deal with issues like borrowed view. But I think it definitely, in terms of architecture, the way that I was trained, you always consider where your views are, and this is how you situate your buildings and how you orient your projects and all that. So I think it's a very kind of relevant issue in terms of Western architecture and also in terms of Eastern application for these issues. But then again, as we're dealing with very tight urban conditions in Hong Kong or in Asia, then you also start to realize that it is very important that you not only deal with the interior space, but you deal with how the view project out and how, what do you see? So actually the smaller the space we're dealing with, the more important that these issues of borrowed view to and kind of a connection between interior and exterior, those issues become even more important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I think back to the studies that I had, it was the indoor-outdoor interconnectivity that was so special about Asian design. And I wonder, you know, Lyndon, I know that you're with us as well. I wonder if you'd like to speak to any of these topics as well, maybe how to integrate that indoor-outdoor or an essence of Asian architecture that you might like to share. We have many architects in the audience today.
I think William articulated it very well, so I don't see a need for me to add. I mean, I think partially it's also the condition in which, especially in Southeast Asia and down south, wherein you're dealing with a tropical condition. And, you know, that's a little bit different when it comes to the north, wherein it becomes more a traditional condition rather than a condition of weather. So when you go to the south, that becomes very much part of the architectural phenomena. But if you come to China, especially up north, maybe not so much in Hong Kong, but Korea and Japan, I think the idea of the outdoor being enclosed, the notion of absence as opposed to presence, the idea of absence being that present, right? If you look at the courtyard, you look at all the even Tulou in Xiamen, all these interesting kind of negative space actually became the more primary space. It's quite interesting how that plays and that role plays in itself. I do think the West deals with it differently, but there is that community as well that they kind of work closely on. But I think that definitely that phenomena, given the fact that we live we live with families or extended families, I think the idea of outside and inside becomes even more important.
Very great. Thank you so much.
When you talk about this topic, maybe I can share a few pages of what you talk about landscape or scenery. That when I work on this, actually, I asked William and the team, can I see your sketches thinking behind all those projects? Then he put a lot boxes of those sketchbooks and some collage illustration that he kind of like a perception that show the client from the very beginning stage. So this is how his mind's about. So I think this is definitely like what you just talked about, the space in William's mind. And also one very fascinating one that I really like, the one on your left-hand side is, so this is right-hand side. The one on your right-hand side, that is another beautiful scenery, kind of a imagination, I would say, before realization that in William's mind. I think that is, I mean, for Asian way to see space, exactly like what Lyndon said. I mean, for example, I'm a big fan of Lyndon's space and architecture project at the same time. So I live in his hotels in Shanghai, a lot of void and empty space. to me, definitely it's not from a Westerner or Western architect to provide such feeling or experience to me. So that exactly those kind of, to me, like a scenery, although it's quite empty somehow, some corners, but that is like the way that the accents that what we have, then how we see things without seeing things, like absence and presence feeling. Yeah.
You're talking about the water house.
Yes. Yeah. Right, Lyndon? That's
That's great, because that was going to be the next topic to ask all of you to talk a little bit about the essence of Asian design and what that means. You were talking a lot about looking back to look forward. There's so much to learn and integrate. And we've also just gone through a huge transformational period where we're thinking about things in new ways, even differently than we might have been before. So as we continue to grow with this evolution of an understanding of the essence of Eastern design, is there anything that you all might like to share with us?
Let me go first. I mean, yeah, Lyndon just end his presentation about looking back and how we get inspiration, then move forward, right? I totally into that. And to answer that, I can't express it enough here. I would recommend you to go Hong Kong Palace Museum to see the Gallery 5, which I've spent more than 2 years as artistic director on that particular project. Exact message what Lyndon said. From that gallery supposed from the ancient or Qing Dynasty craft and objects, but at the same time, the stories I want to tell is how we learn from the past and what is the power that we gain from that and become for ourselves, and then take it to now and future. If anyone interested about past and now and future, that topic, particularly involved in Asian and Chinese, go for Palace Museum. I think I'm very into this philosophy or logic and values.
Fantastic. Do either of you want to?
Maybe if I think about Asian design and the countries that are very strong in having the root, I think we look at, definitely we will look at China, we look at Japan, we look at Korea, and now to a very strong extent, I think we start to see the rise in Thai design. I think in a way, maybe in the past, you know, maybe in the past 50 years, when we're talking about the growing of these places, I remember I went to Korea during the '88 Olympics, and it was a totally different, it was just starting out, and it's still a very kind of beginning stage of development for that country. And within these, you know, 40 years, you can see that change, the rapid change into something that start to a place that really has a strong identity of its own. I think when you start to look at the way we think of design in the last 30 years in an Asian place, I think we did go through a time where we were very much affected by the growth and by the wealth, and then with that you went to some very opulent type of design, and you pretty much start to plaster everything with expensive material, and that I wouldn't say what influence that is, but I think that's probably definitely bad influence. And then I think now as we're going, you know, as these countries start to have maturity and have confidence, I think that goes back to Lyndon's first slide about, when you start to understand your culture, is because you start to have confidence in yourself. And I think then you start to look into some architecture that are more about the essence of what your culture is about. And I think that essence probably then will be stripped of all these unnecessary decorative opulence. And I think we would start to look at something a lot more pure, and I think probably more comfortable to your eyes, because we're used to seeing things certain ways. And I really think maybe that's really what Asian design will it already has become, and I think that will be in a more confident and stronger position going forward.
Beautiful. Lyndon, did you want to add?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a loaded question, and I'm going to defer it more from a global perspective. I think I want to refer back to sociology, because from its earlier days, sociology had kind of deal with these concepts in describing global differences. And maybe our architects, we can glean from it. So if you look at Auguste Comte's work, the sociologist Herbert Spencer, for instance, to Emily Durkheim, to even Lester Frank, granting sociological thought discuss social progress by drawing broad distinction between advanced and primitive, for instance, and institution and society, logic and emotion. And in not so many words, as the world moves on, sociology starts to define the difference between global north and the global south. The fact that global north are the Europeans and the Americans, and they deal with logic, institution, meaning logic over emotion. Maybe modern as opposed to primitive, institution as opposed to community. And then label the global difference by saying, if you actually are not modern or logical or have a sense of institutional idea, then maybe you're third world. And I think, I think they're quite accurate in sort of portraying that, sort of the differentiation. But perhaps the notion of being third world or global south, be it Africa or Asia, is not so bad. And we're now seeing it in this post-pandemic situation, that perhaps being primitive has its own value and its societal value over what is modern. And perhaps having emotion actually is not so bad than pure logic. And the idea of family or community might actually be stronger than institution. So I think maybe the Eastern architecture starts to gravitate toward this whole notion of the global south, and perhaps our architecture starts to resonate with many of these obsessions. Perhaps it's a little bit more primitive, perhaps it's a little bit more emotional, and people can't really describe it even in schools. And maybe it's okay, and perhaps it's a bit more communal as opposed to institutional. And I guess that kind of language, the world is starting to see that maybe it's okay. Maybe that's another alternative. I'm not a proponent. I'm not here to say it is better. I'm just saying it's an alternative that perhaps the world can see it as a greater whole, right? So I find that quite interesting as you asked that question, Christine, because I think architecture needed that revolution and need that jolt from this pandemic that we're dealing with. And all of a sudden, the idea of working from home and not necessarily in the office, and being able to navigate both your home as a theater, as a restaurant, as a place of schooling, as a place for work, very much like an African tribe or back to the Asian tribe, is the core of very much how we should structure as a new proposal and as a new way of living.
Thanks, Lyndon. And I think what you've brought up actually takes us to another direction, which is the importance of connectivity and of emotion. And it really is something. There's a whole swell now around the world to accept an understanding of where we are in our physical and mental well-being, and how architecture is part of helping us to be our best and to find those spaces, whether it's finding a place that is empty so that you can be at peace, or finding a place that allows you to borrow scenery, or finding a place to create your own ideas. We get to honor that within spaces in a new way, with a new appreciation that's shared. And so I do appreciate you bringing that up. So I don't know if you'd like, are there any questions from the audience that you'd like to share? And Florence, I don't know how much time we have, but there's so much we'd love to talk about with these gentlemen.
Okay, maybe let me start. I'm interested in the book design itself. Yeah, because so much has just now been discussing around the culture, the impact of society, and so on. But let's get to the basic of it. This is also about the book that Stanley and William working together to maybe you can tell us something about the design of this book. Like, for example, like why the fish, even though I understand that there was a project that William worked on, and also why the fluorescent colors, or how the books are being structured. Maybe you can share some thoughts behind it.
I think this fish got a very long debate from me and William, not debate between me and William. Actually, we are on the same boat, but the publisher really not into this direction, that we got to spend a long time to convince them. Of course, it's a very important project from William's the lantern sculpture in Victoria Park for Mid-Autumn Festival that we really like. I think Mid-Autumn Festival first lantern definitely is our very Chinese and Asian stuff, but the publisher said, well, why not a photo then? That's a very no compromise kind of debate anyway. And at the end, we convinced them. No, not really convinced them. We insisted. We choose this orange color because we want to have a future bright, cheerful next. We don't know what's next after this, like a case study, I would say, a very personal case study for his 30 years. And the blue color, actually, we reference for the blueprint of architects. The subconsciously blue, this blue color is very architect people. And this is open, not completed, like a full stop, not really a full stop to lead into next. For the whole book, actually, it's not project by project. If you read into these 300-something pages, they are by topics. They're not linear. They basically, it's like a journey of an experience, which is really unlike the other architectural book that is by project, by timeline. This is very, for some of the people, maybe a little bit different to articulate, I would say. But when you finish 300-something pages, you get a feeling of those topics about craft. Even the last chapter is about utopia, which is also another open-ended kind of big topic. Yeah. We did a lot of collage things. My photos collage, William's illustration, or William's illustration versus another project as a photo. So we just experiments, kind of, I would say, visually a little bit poetic than rational. I don't know, William, you agree with my description or not?
Yeah, well, I think well, first of all, Stanley, very kind of kindly offered his help. So, this book is I take him as a partner, and a partner who did all the work, because sometimes during the process, I would sneak out of my office, and he would be in the office in the conference room still working with the team, but I just sneaked out because, and he is so meticulous with every part of the book. And one philosophy I did take is, I'm sure all of us have really awful clients that kind of hired you and then they impose all their ideas on you. So then this time I say, no, let him do it. And I just kind of trusted him and let him run with it, right? And I think it proven itself right. And the book actually started as a 250-page book and a hardcover coffee table book. But then I think both of us don't really want that. So then we thought, we thought it should be thicker because we need more pages to tell the story. And also it kind of has almost like, to me, it's a very philosophical way of organizing the book, that it's not chronological, it's not project by project, it's not, it just kind of things flow in and out of it. And at the beginning, we have almost like 20 pages with no page number, and you slowly kind of ease into the book. It's basically just images, and I think images that Stanley found, and I don't have any objection. And so we just kind of, so it filled you up and you kind of almost like an Asian way of cleansing your thought, and then you start the book. And then at the end, we have the same almost 20 pages that pull you away from it. So I think the whole idea is kind of very philosophical, which I kind of like. And also, let me show you then. I have to show the cover. So when you open the cover, then you see the two fish. One more skelectal and one more full. So again, it's the yin and yang idea. And I think Chinese always like this idea of the two fish. But I think in the Western world also you have the Pisces, which is the two fish. So I think there is something kind of going on in the book that it's more philosophical, which is kind of like probably what we want to achieve. We want people to not totally understand it. I don't think I fully understand the book, but I think that's fine. I mean, you leave some room for imagination and discovery, because if you look through it, there are all these subtitles, and there's like a small A and a small B, and you have to really look for it. And we're really challenging people to, the more time you spend with it, the more you discover from it.
Wonderful. Wonderful question and wonderful answers. Do we have any other insights or requests or comments? Fantastic. One more here from.
So William, an incredibly accomplished profession and career. I'm looking forward to enter that journey that you have worked through with Stanley. But what comes next?
Well, I guess
He's a very busy painter now.
Well, I think at my age, you start to want to do all the things that you still have time to do and you have not done yet. So I think definitely I am kind of, luckily during COVID, I actually made use of these 3 years. First was to do the book, and also I started painting. It's something that, I probably would never have done without the time from COVID. So I started painting about 2020, and I've had 3 exhibitions since then. So I think now I'm starting to think that I always thought that, am I an architect or am I an artist? And I think that people took me more as an architect. And now people are starting to take me more seriously as an artist. And then I think that is kind of a good thing to start at my age. I think you don't start things at 65. That's not often the case, but I did start to do my art side, and I do see kind of possibilities there. And I think eventually, I think architecture and art will eventually become one thing again. I kind of saw them as one thing, and then I think that they need to be two different things. And then I developed them, and then I think eventually they might become one thing again.
Thank you.
Just when you mentioned about what's now and what's next, I think this is interesting. I want to further to go into this topic that actually William, me and Lyndon are very close friends, and we all share our project from time to time. For example, when I look at William, his exhibition after exhibition, space project after space project, and also I read Lyndon's last 2 or 3 years. I can't physically went to his new project that I saw from Facebook. I think interestingly, when we are creative people, that whenever you finish a project to communicate, to share with others, that in conjunction with time, what kind of audience, what kind of society, what kind of people you encounter, that I do think I really put that perspective to measure how I appreciate Lyndon's latest work, William's new paintings. For example, Lyndon put up a lot of slides about Zhangke, which is Zhangke's a very great China movie maker that he's also my good friend. How he sees the society in conjunction with time. That is very fundamental. When to do what? That is very, very crucial. Lyndon, you want to talk a little bit more, because I am also very into the slides and topic you shared before.
No, I think Stanley, that's a very, very good point, because I was gonna, our latest monograph, I don't know if I sent it to you guys, but I'm going to be in Hong Kong on the 26th, 27th. If you guys are there, we should definitely catch up, and I would love to give you our book, but it's called Threshold, and the Chinese version of it is coming out. I don't want to talk about my book because this is William and your book, but it talks about Tian, which is threshold, right? So Tian is interesting because it also Kongjian, which is space, Zhongjian is middle, Shijian is time. So it's funnily enough, I was in a symposium about 2 weeks ago with Go Hasegawa and Sejima in Tokyo. And it's interesting because people talked about Asian architecture not having a period. The West always have a certain period, or a hyphen or an exclamation mark. If you look at the Pantheon, the Parthenon, there's always that final ending, a beginning and an ending. And they were dealing with this idea of no period architecture. When you're circling around, you're around the periphery, it's all about ritual, and it's all about this whole Tian, or in the middle, or the third space, liminal space, interstitial space. And it's interesting, the fundamental kind of similarities in all the things that we're doing. And I don't know, maybe it's the region that we are in that forces us to continually think around the course of no period architecture, no period, no exclamation, maybe a sense of humility, a sense of uncertainty, a sense of experimentation. And whenever there is a finality, people often say, maybe that's too commercial, right? So I find that you talked about that and about that search. I find it very interesting that I think, William, I encourage you. I'm a frustrated artist as well. I started as an art major. You don't know that, but
I have your artwork in my office.
Oh yeah, I have to please my Chinese father, so I have to leave art and do architecture. But I saw a lot of your work. There's a lot of Hockney inspired moment, which I absolutely I'm very impressed with your sort of proclivity. But I think it's also what Stanley talks about, doing the right thing at the right time, which is what Zhangke talks about all the time. So I think we are at that stage, and the liberty, especially in Asia, wherein things are really economically going in that right direction, that we have to seize this moment and to really express some of the fundamental issues that we're dealing with.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on, to do the right thing at the right time. And
One last note that if you really want to see what Asian feeling that in my mind, coincidentally, this photo that I write my paragraph to end the Asian spirit in a paragraph using this photo. This photo actually is collected by Asian Society in the middle of the hall. Then you see the way I see Asian kind of visually and emotionally.
thank you so much. Any last words?
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Christine, for moderating for us and sharing a kind of Western point of view with this topic, and thank everyone for coming. Yeah.
And also, I think when you guys read this, definitely I spent a very long time on this book. I never spent such long time for my book, actually, never. The reason is such a big topic and unique topic that put together, not only seeing William's career and we are glorifying him or honor him, how much good works he done, actually because this works is projecting this topic, a very unique Asian topic that I hope people can also see the possibility of Asian uniqueness and power. I think that we should treasure this book beyond only William. This is a big topic here.
I think there's also something to be said about that book, which I really like. It reminded me of Lav Diaz, the Filipino film director. His movies are about 10 hours long, but you can go in and out of the movie. Yeah, you could go in and out of the movie and feel like you are part of the scene constantly. You leave 3 hours later, you come back after dinner, you come back, it's on the 6th hour, and you're still, in many ways, that book is this book. And I commend both Stan and William for creating this amazing set of scenes and visuals that allows you to go in and out. It's also a sense of humility, rather than saying, I have these projects to show, but rather a set of spaces, a set of conditions that deals with the subjects as opposed to objects. And I find it to be really quite rewarding. I only have a small snippet to contribute, but I'm really looking at that book. I realized this whole idea of Lav Diaz moment of come in when you wish to, you can leave and come back later. So it's well done, and congratulate both of you.
Very good analogy, Lyndon. Actually, I saw that movie in Hong Kong.
You did? Okay, good.
Yeah, that was shown in Hong Kong Film Festival. I was there. Yeah,
oh,
exactly.
Very good.
Go in and out for that. A real-time experience.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Lyndon, it's great to see you.
I'm waiting for your book come to Hong Kong, Lyndon.
Yes. I will write you guys.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
So on behalf of AIA Hong Kong, I also want to thank William, Stanley, Lyndon, and also Christine for sharing with us today. And next Monday, yes, Monday again, next Monday at the Rotunda in Exchange Square, we are going to have the annual honors and awards ceremony. So all are welcome. Please join us on next Monday. Okay, thank you, everyone. And have a good night.